Hello everyone, welcome along to today's webinar. We're going to talk all about using authentic materials in class. Just before we get going, let me introduce myself because there may be some people who have come along for the first time today. My name is Mairead and I've been in the world of TEFL for over 20 years now, and 8 of those years have been with the TEFL Academy. So hopefully I will be in a good position to share some experiences with you and help you out with any questions you may have. As I said, today's webinar is going to be about using authentic materials in class. So as ever, there will be a presentation of about 25 to 30 minutes, and the second half of the webinar will be devoted to all of your questions on the topic of using authentic materials in class. So if you are ready, let's begin. So the first logical question you may have is, what are authentic materials? And I know on both the level 3 and the level 5 course, there are assignments that will require you to source authentic materials. So it's super, super important that you are aware what authentic materials are. So authentic materials are materials that mother tongue speakers or highly proficient speakers of English would use in their everyday real world context. So wherever you are in the world, for example, I'm in Ireland, so I tend to interact with Irish news, and Irish issues. So I would read the newspaper online, for example. RTE.ie would be my website of choice. So anything I read on my Irish website, would be authentic materials. Okay. Authentic materials are aimed at mother tongue or highly proficient speakers of English. Some more examples could be even simpler things like restaurant menus. Okay. Songs written and performed in English, newspaper articles, whether physical newspapers or online newspapers, online blogs, okay, TV or newspaper advertisements. Basically anything that mother tongue or highly proficient speakers of English would interact with on a daily basis. As you can see from the examples, they can be from written texts or they can be listening based. Okay. So what is the difference between authentic and EFL teaching materials? Well, authentic materials are not created for teaching the language. Okay. They are not simplified. They are not modified for English language learners. Okay, they are aimed at mother tongue or highly proficient speakers of English. However, we do use them a lot in the classroom, and we ought to use them a lot in the classroom to enable students to immerse themselves in the language. Okay, and not in the nicely packaged, sanitized version of language that they find in course books. We want them to see the real thing, okay, that they will encounter out in the real world. So non-authentic materials or teaching materials are anything that has been designed specifically for the process of teaching English. All right, so they are non-authentic. They are especially created for learning. So anything you use, such as worksheets, textbooks, instructional CDs or DVDs, like learn a language in 4 weeks, that type of thing. Language learning websites, apps, they are not considered authentic because they have been created especially for the purpose of teaching the language. Okay. So it's really, really important that you are clear on the difference. Okay. Non-authentic material is for learning English. But authentic material is everything that a mother tongue speaker would use and interact with on a day-to-day basis. Okay. And as students spend so much of their time in the classroom using non-authentic materials, such as course books, yeah, it's important that we make the most of every opportunity to introduce some authentic materials, just to add variety and to let them see language as it is used in the wild. All right. So, what are some of the advantages of authentic materials? Well, there are tons of advantages. I think the main reason for using them is that authentic materials are really, really motivating for students. Okay, it gives them a sense of enormous accomplishment and enormous pride and enormous progress if they can understand genuine texts aimed at L1 speakers or mother tongue speakers of English. Okay, it exposes students to the natural use of language in a genuine context. So again, it's not just some sanitized text written to go in a course book. Okay, it is, an authentic text will be an example of the natural use of English in whatever context the text is about. And aside from that, if we can incorporate authentic materials pretty often into our classes, that prepares students for daily life in a foreign country. Okay, so if, for example, you are teaching in Spain and some of your students want to go spend some time in the UK, if we can use some authentic material from the UK, talking about current issues there, current news there, yeah. And, it doesn't always need to be news-based. It could be pop culture. It could be about art. It could be about movies. Yeah. If we can expose our students to the culture of the country that they will potentially one day go and visit or live in, that will give them a huge head start when it comes to acclimatizing to their new country. And you know what? Even if students will never live in the UK or in Ireland or in Australia or in the US, it doesn't matter. Okay, using authentic material will always bring in that element of culture. It will broaden their horizons. It will teach them new things about the country, yeah, independent of the language. Because as you all know, there's a lot more to a country than just its language, right? So authentic texts are just hugely enriching for students when it comes to building their knowledge of the English-speaking world. Some more advantages. Well, topics can be selected according to students' interests. Going back to our course books, what's in the book is in the book. Okay, we can't chop and change the texts because they are printed. They are the texts. But with authentic materials, we can go source our own texts and bring them in. For example, I was teaching a class recently that were very interested in sports. Yeah, sports played in Ireland, where I'm teaching. Okay, in the course books, there was nothing about sport in Ireland. Yeah, as you can imagine. But, I was able to go off and find a lot of texts in newspapers, in online sites, yeah, podcasts. Yeah, I was able to find a ton of stuff to use in class, and it was really interesting for them. That is one of the absolute beautiful things about authentic materials. You can just go out and find whatever you need, whatever your students are interested in. So it gives you that freedom that a course book does not always offer. Authentic materials give students confidence. Yeah, remember before we said it, that it's motivating? Well, it also gives them confidence to engage in conversations with mother tongue or highly proficient speakers. Okay, authentic materials allow the students to prove that they can manage in an English-speaking world. Okay, it gives them that boost of confidence, and that can only be a good thing, right? And what's more, using authentic materials provides a great challenge for motivated students. Okay. Again, the course books, they're very heavily graded. They're very heavily sanitized. So for the more able, motivated students, authentic materials can just give them that boost, that extra boost of challenge that a course book perhaps will not offer. Now, I don't want to make it seem like I'm dissing course books. Okay, I am absolutely not. You know, course books have a massive role to play in the classroom for sure, and they can be incredibly useful. But the point I would like to get across is that as well as course books, we should definitely try to inject some authentic materials as we go along to supplement. So they are some of the advantages, and there are many advantages. However, it's also true that there are some disadvantages, okay, to using authentic materials. I guess the main disadvantage that you may encounter is that unlike graded texts or texts from course books, some of the language may be above the student's level. And in fact, it will be above the student's level, okay? That is the very nature of authentic materials. Because remember, they are not aimed at learners, they are aimed at mother tongue or highly proficient speakers. So you may find an article about a really cool topic, but when you look at it, you may think, oof, no, this is way too difficult. Okay, my students are not going to be able to do that. And, you know, it's important to realize that there will always be an element of too difficult in authentic materials. Okay, there just will be because of the nature of authentic materials. So we have a couple of solutions to the too difficult issue. One solution, especially if you're teaching low-level classes, can be that the teacher simplifies the material to suit the level of the student. So perhaps you take the article that is very interesting but potentially too difficult, and you might remove some paragraphs. Okay, you might make it shorter. You may look at some of the vocabulary that is above the level, and you may simplify it. You may use some easier synonyms. Okay. It could be that you leave the article as it is, but you add in a word bank. Okay. So, you know, there are some adaptations we can use to make an authentic material text easier for our students. Okay. Shortening, editing, using synonyms, etc. You know, the majority of the article will still be authentic, but because of those changes you have made, they will no longer be truly authentic, but semi-authentic. Okay, so 90% authentic, but with some changes made to make them more accessible for your students. I would have to say that when it comes to adapting authentic material, I would prefer to go down the route of offering word banks rather than changing the language. But, you know, that's up to you. That's a call that you can make. So yeah, semi-authentic materials is always an option if you just think the text is far too difficult. We've talked a lot so far about written texts. Let's talk about listening, like podcasts or YouTube videos or songs. Well, when we use authentic material listening texts, one huge disadvantage is that the pace of the speaker might be very fast. As I said, because authentic material is not aimed at learners, it's aimed at proficient or mother tongue speakers. Yeah, the speaker will speak at normal pace, which can be far too fast for your learner. So again, this is an issue, but it needn't be a deal breaker. You know, students will need to deal with very fast speech at times. Okay, it's just inevitable in the real world that they will need to listen to mother tongue speakers or highly proficient speakers. So we need to think of a solution to this. And one solution can be to play the listening text several times. Okay. It's not just a one and done scenario as it would be in the real world. We can play it several times. Maybe the first time they listen, they can listen for gist. Yeah, just for the global meaning of what is being said. Okay, then maybe they listen again, but this time we demand more details, like a deeper comprehension of the text. Okay, give them several attempts to hear and figure out what is going on. What I always like to do, maybe on the third listen, okay, once we have done our comprehension questions, I will give them the actual script of what is being said, and we will listen again and they can read along. Okay, that's a really nice way to kind of consolidate what they have understood and to fill in the gaps of the bits that they have missed. Okay, and then I might even do a fourth listening again, this time without the questions, without the script, just to let them sit back, relax, and listen. Okay, let the text wash over them again. And hopefully they will understand a lot more after answering questions and after reading the script. Okay, so, even though the listening text is authentic, you can let them listen various times. Just try to make sure that they're listening for different stuff every time. That will stop it from getting monotonous. All right. Another thing we can do to help our students a lot with this very fast pace of speaking in authentic materials is that we can pay a lot of attention to connected speech. If you have studied your online module on pronunciation, no doubt you will have encountered connected speech. This is how native or highly proficient speakers run all of their words together. Okay. For example, if I said to you, do you want a coffee? Yeah, do you want a coffee? What am I really saying here? I'm saying, do you want a coffee? Yeah, but using connected speech, all running it along together, it comes out as, do you want a coffee? And as I'm sure you can appreciate, this is really confusing for students. Okay, they do not automatically know that when we're speaking, we run all of our words together. So it's really important that as you're teaching, through every class, through whatever you're teaching, that you do incorporate a lot of this real world speaking, okay, and real world listening. The idea isn't that students will end up saying things like, do you want a coffee? The idea is that they will understand it when it is said to them. Okay, so that's definitely something we can pay attention to improve their listening skills and to help them deal with native or highly proficient speakers and understand them. Okay, so really, when it comes to listening and authentic material listening texts, we have to play the long game. It's not something that is a very easy fix, okay, but it's something that we just need to keep chipping away at, raising our students' awareness of it, and just preparing them for the fact that in authentic material, they will encounter pretty fast connected speech. And just before we leave that slide, I just want to urge you not to be afraid of that, okay? Don't avoid listening to authentic material listening texts, okay? You've got to start somewhere with your students. So, don't be afraid. The more you use authentic material listening texts, the easier it will get for your students, okay? They may be a bit freaked out at first, but push through. Practice makes perfect. Okay. Another disadvantage when it comes to listening texts could be that the accents of various speakers are really difficult to understand if students have only heard the teacher's English accent. So, for example, my students are very much used to my Irish accent at this stage. But if we're doing a listening and the person is from Scotland, well, it's like they've never heard English before, okay? Because it just sounds so different. Yeah, the accent is so different to mine. The same if they are listening to Australian speakers or New Zealand speakers, okay? It's not that they wouldn't necessarily understand the words, it's just that the accent kind of stuns them for a while and they just can't get their ear around the different accent. Okay, so again, don't avoid speakers with different accents. Okay, students need to encounter all of these different accents in order to understand them. Practice makes perfect. So as a teacher, it is your job to try to find examples of different accents to assist the students' exposure to different accents of English. Okay, so it may be that you find a YouTube video of a person from Wales speaking, or you may find a really cool video on a Canadian website. Yeah, you know, it's up to you to bring in as many different examples of accents in the English-speaking world as you can. Okay, that is the only way that students are going to be able to be in the position of understanding speakers from all different countries in the English-speaking world. And of course, it doesn't only need to be the English-speaking world. Okay, chances are that students will come into lots of communication with speakers from other countries too, outside of the English-speaking world. You know, expose students to as many accents of people speaking English as you can. Okay, it will definitely help them in the long run. So yeah, please don't avoid the accent issue. Going back to course books, in my experience, students really only encounter 2 accents, and that would be standard UK accent, like the King's English, yeah, which is only spoken by a very small percentage of people in the UK, and kind of American Midwest, very neutral American accent. Okay, in my experience with course books, that is really they are the only 2 accents that students are exposed to. So, you know, there is no Irish, there's no Scottish accent, there's no Welsh accent, there is no Australian, yeah, there's no Kiwi accent. Okay, we don't hear people from the Caribbean. Okay, we don't hear any African English accents. So yeah, bring them in. Find as many cool, authentic materials from speakers with different accents and try to use them. So another disadvantage, and especially nowadays, topics may not be suitable for a mixed gender or multicultural class. So we may find a news article, okay, but as we're reading it, we may think, I have a student from that country in this class and they are not going to enjoy that text. Okay, so I'd better not use it. Okay, so the solution to this is that you have got to avoid topics like politics, sexism, racism, violence, death, texts with a lot of swearing, profanity, religious references, etc. Okay, and it can be hard when we're really interested in the topic and we think our students might be really interested in the topic, but you know, we cannot be bringing in potentially divisive material. The reason for that is that the focus must be on learning the language. Okay, and in order for the focus to remain on learning the language rather than perhaps controversial topics, the students, well, all students must be comfortable with the material they are exposed to. So always be mindful of the authentic material you choose. Okay, think of it from your student's perspective. And if there's anything in that text that you think may offend someone or upset someone, yeah, find something else. Okay. We are there at the end of the day to teach them English. We are not there to educate them on topics that perhaps they do not need or they do not want educating on. All right. That is super, super important. And if you are doing the level 5 course and you come along to the final assignment, which is based on an authentic text, be mindful of that when you're choosing. If you submit a text that we believe would not be suitable for multicultural group, you will be asked to resubmit. Okay. So I would say, try to stay on topics that are of general interests. Yeah, topics like food, like travel, like national holidays, okay, festivals, hobbies. Yeah. Try to avoid the controversial stuff, because even though, it can be interesting, we do not want to risk upsetting our students. Okay. So just to finish up with our presentation, let's look at this question. How do we use authentic materials in class? Well, first of all, I would say that when we think of authentic materials, it's tempting to think that the entire lesson must be based around them, okay? But really, that is not necessarily true. You may just use authentic materials in the warmer, for example, and that is just as valid, okay? Or you may just use them for the freer practice stage. So don't feel that if you're choosing a text, you are tied into it for the entire lesson, okay? Because you're not. Authentic materials are flexible that way. You can use them in any one stage, you can use them for the whole lesson. It's totally up to you. So here are some steps I would probably follow if I were to use an authentic text. So first step, I would choose a real world context. So I might think, oh, I really fancy doing a class on travel. Yeah, I think my students would like that, and I think that would be a fun lesson. So choose a real life situation. Then see if you can narrow your focus a little and select a theme or a context. So I might think, airports. There's lots to be said about going through an airport. Okay, there's tons of interesting things to say about it. There's loads of really good vocabulary. It's really useful for students in the real world. Okay, there may be some things done differently in airports here than in their countries. There's a lot of value to be had from an authentic text about airports and traveling through airports. So then step 3, you're going to set your lesson aim. So as always, we know that our lesson has to have a name. In other words, what will students know or be able to do at the end of the lesson? Okay. So I might say, by the end of the lesson, students will be better able to understand vocabulary and techniques of navigating an airport in Ireland or in the UK or whatever country your authentic text is based in. Okay, it's really important that you set your lesson aim, because that will inform how you are going to incorporate the authentic material into the lesson. So it'll allow you to think, okay, what vocabulary items will they need in order to understand this text? Okay, so you might decide to go down the route of pre-teaching, blocking vocabulary. Okay, so ask yourself, if my students are reading this text, what word related to airports and navigating airports am I pretty sure that they will not understand? Okay, and that is the word, or they are the words that you want to pre-teach before they see the text. Okay, so you are in effect removing the blocking vocabulary from the text by teaching it in advance. All right. So that when they do read the authentic text, they'll be ready for it. They won't be freaked out because any potential stumbling blocks will have been removed by your pre-teaching. That will make it a lot more of an agreeable experience for them if they feel like they can understand the text as a whole. Okay. I would say that when you are selecting a text, either listening or written authentic material to use in your class, try not to use texts or try to use texts that don't have to be substantially shortened or edited. Okay, it's easier for everybody if you can go in with a pretty short text. Okay, don't go in with pages and pages. That's not realistic. Okay, if you do want to edit it, as we spoke about earlier, try not to edit it too heavily. Okay, because we don't want to destroy the structure of the authentic material. Basically, try to go with what creates the least work for you. Yeah. Because, when we're teaching lots of classes, we don't have all the time in the world to be adapting texts. And finally, step 5, check for any copyright issues if you are duplicating materials. So normally copyright does not tend to be a problem if we're using it for educational purposes, which you would be if you're teaching. But at the same time, try not to take stuff from people's personal blogs, etc. Be careful with photographs. Yeah, try not to use people's personal photographs. If you can, stick to larger websites, news-based websites, and make sure the images you're using are copyright-free. Okay. But again, as I said, normally copyright will not apply to materials being used for educational purposes. So this isn't probably something you need to worry a whole lot about, but just be aware. So some examples of using authentic materials. Well, if you're teaching adults or high school classes or older teenagers, you might decide to use a current edition of a newspaper and let the students find an interesting item to talk about. Okay, if you're in an English-speaking country, this is really easy to come by. Okay, just pick up some papers in the local shop, or, there are always some free papers doing the rounds, free papers from a particular city or region. But, if you're living in a non-English speaking country, you can find all of this online. Okay. The thing I like about news stories is that students may be aware of the news stories in their own language. So, that will give them a point of departure. It will generate interest and make them more comfortable discussing the topic. Other things you can do with authentic texts may be role plays. So, for example, if you're teaching lower level students and you happen to have some menus in English, some takeaway menus, you could set up a role play, for example, in a restaurant context, bring in the menus, food, bring in cutlery. Yeah, you could set up an entire restaurant role play just using the menus. Songs and video clips are also incredibly popular to use. So you could play a song a few times. You could select some vocabulary to teach from it. You could explore the themes of the song in the video. It could lead into a speaking task. Yeah, there's a whole lot you can do based around songs and video clips. And finally, when you are using authentic materials, always consider putting your students in small groups to work on it. Okay, authentic materials can be a little daunting, and as far as your students are concerned, there is safety in numbers. So I would recommend small groups. So in a small group, students can help each other and support each other with understanding. They probably won't feel self-conscious as they would if they were responding in front of the whole class. If they're discussing the text, yeah, they can get kind of nervous talking in front of the whole group just in case they make a mistake or in case there's something they haven't understood. So by having them in small groups, they're only talking to 2 or 3 other people. So yeah, it's a little more comforting, I think. And in general, I find that small groups facilitate better interaction. Okay, because everybody is speaking most of the time, as opposed to a whole group setting where one person is speaking and all of the others are just sitting in silence awaiting their turn. So yeah, small groups rule. I'm a big fan. All right. So that is all I have to say for the moment on using authentic materials in class. Now it's over to you. Any questions you have, pop them in the chat box and we will be more than happy to answer them. As ever, I will only be answering questions about authentic materials, as that was the topic of our webinar. If you have any questions about any administrative things like extensions or enrollments, please send a ticket to tutor support. Please send a ticket to student support. And if you have any questions about the course content or about assignments, send along a ticket to tutor support. But yeah, anything about authentic materials, type it in the chat box and we will talk about it. All right, so it's great to see such a geographical spread again. We have Canada, Jamaica, UK, Philadelphia, South Africa. Very good. Hello, Graham. Good to see you again. We have Joe in Alabama. Yeah, lots of familiar names today. Also some new names. So welcome to you if this is your first one. So hello, Colour of Art. Is it still an authentic text if you adapt it to their level? Well, as we said at the beginning, you can make adaptations for sure, like shortening or using synonyms or editing. But then we can't really call it authentic anymore. Instead, we would call it semi-authentic. Okay. But you know what? Semi-authentic is better than no element of authentic. So yeah, I would not worry about making some adaptations. Students will still benefit enormously from semi-authentic, even if it's not entirely authentic. Okay. So hello, Bianca. What do you do when the student brings that kind of material into class? For example, for a bring and share project where they select the text or if it's in their own writing. Do you mean perhaps, Bianca, texts that are not entirely suitable for the group? You know, in terms of the themes explored or the language? I would say, Bianca, just try to have a look through what they have brought in before they present. And that way you'll just be able to head off any potential issues. Or, you know, you can tell your class, you know, there may be some issues in this text that you may be uncomfortable with. Is there anybody who would prefer not to use it? But honestly, I would try to have a look at everything in advance, even just a super quick look at everything. And if I feel there's anything in there, I will just ask that student to sit out the task. Okay. Or if it's a case that you're just nominating people to present, I would not nominate that person. I guess as well, Bianca, you can do a lot of preparatory work on this, like when you are setting the text, make it clear that there are topics that you will not accept. Okay, so, you know, you can kind of preempt the issue somewhat. I hope that's what you were referring to, Bianca. Oh, yes, I see your next message. Good, yes, that is what you were referring to. Perfect. So yeah, everything I said applies. Thank you, Bianca. That's a really good question. All right, so hello, Saji. How do you use podcasts in class? Is there a maximum time for the audio? Well, Saji, I would just use them as I would any normal listening text. If, for example, you're using a TED Talk or if you're using a podcast, I would just warn against playing anything that's too long, because then it just becomes really taxing for the student. Like I would probably try to keep it to 5 minutes max, 5-6 minutes. You know, if they're a really advanced class, I might push that to like 10. But generally, I would try to keep to about 5-6 minutes max. But, you know, that said, there is no established maximum, you know. Just in my experience, students tend not to be able to concentrate for more than 5 or 6 minutes on an authentic material listening text. But yeah, it's up to you. You know, you'll be able to gauge, when you get to know your students, you'll be able to gauge what they can handle or not. In terms of using them, you know, I would do all of the usual listening stuff. You know, the first time they're listening, to answer a gist question. For example, what's the topic of this podcast? The second time they listen, you know, they're answering more detailed questions. As I said, you can have them listen a third time with the script, just to make sure they understand. Or you can jump into a related follow-on speaking task where they get to discuss their opinions and ideas. You know, just treat it as you would any other listening text. All right, thank you, Saiju. Great questions as always. Elena, probably a silly one, but how to detect copyrighted pictures. Well, normally, Elena, you will see underneath them the little C for copyright, you know, the little symbol with the C and the circle around it. As I said, though, for educational purposes, typically copyright can be overlooked. But I would not, for example, take somebody's, like a stranger's photographs from Facebook or something. I think that would be rather unfair. But if the pictures are out in the public domain, like on a news website or a lifestyle website, I would be tempted to use it. All right. Thank you, Elena. So, hello, Kabira. How often should you use authentic texts? I would say, Kabira, as often as you can. You know, there's no real rule for how often to use them, but, you know, I would always try to incorporate them as much as I can. As I said earlier, it doesn't need to be for the entire lesson. Like, you might just play a 1-minute video as part of your warmer to establish the context of a lesson and then not use it anymore. And that's absolutely fine. Okay. You know, but do try to incorporate them as much as you can. I guarantee that your students will appreciate it. All right. And so, hello, Peter. Do you keep a catalogue of lessons that you repeat? Yeah, absolutely, Peter. Especially when it comes to authentic materials. Like if I find a really good news article or a really good YouTube video, or, you know, an especially interesting podcast or a TED Talk, yeah, I will absolutely keep that on file. And I will keep the lesson plan that I used it in, so that, yeah, when the opportunity comes around again, I just need to whip it out of its file and we are good to go. And, you know, that goes for everything, Peter, not just authentic material, but any lessons, you know. Keep everything, keep reference to everything, because, yeah, chances are you will get to use it again pretty quickly. All right, so Shanukas, I'm really sorry if I haven't pronounced that correctly. When doing a podcast with a speaker talking too fast, would you recommend slowing the speed down or just have them listen repeatedly? I mean, I see the advantages of slowing it down, but honestly, when it comes to authentic material, I would be reluctant to slow it down, because when you slow it down, like, it loses that natural rhythm, natural intonation. So instead of slowing it down, what I would do is spend more time preparing them in advance, like pre-teaching the difficult words, you know, maybe saying some of the more difficult sentences with them, breaking them down. saying, okay, this is what he says. Write down the words you think you hear. Just do that with a couple of the more difficult sentences. I would prepare them in advance rather than slow it down. Okay, just in order to maintain the integrity of it. But, maybe with your class, slowing down the speed would work. That would be up to you to gauge. But I would really try not to slow down the speed, I think. All right. Graham, if you have the permission of the author, are blogs from websites okay? Yeah, sure. I mean, if you have permission, why not? Why not? Okay, so yeah, you could fire off an email if it's from, like from a private blog as opposed to one for mass distribution. All right, thank you, Graham. Saji, thank you. I've used some TED. They're about 5 minutes. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Again, it can be hugely dependent on your group of students. You may have a group that can cope with longer. Yeah, you may have a group that can't. Okay, so as you get to know the students, it'll be much easier for you to gauge. Much easier for you to gauge what they can handle in terms of length. All right. So Kabira. Ooh, this is an interesting question. If using a video clip, is it a good idea to have the subtitles? Oh, I like this question, Kabira. I think the first time they listen, I wouldn't use the subtitles. Because if you use the subtitles the first time, they're not going to listen. Okay, they're just going to read. Okay, it's just the way it goes. If there are subtitles in front of us, we can't ignore them. I know I can't anyway. I'm just glued to the subtitles and everything else disappears in my world. So I don't think I would use them the first time. I mightn't even use them the second time. Okay, I would try to do my listening tasks, my gist task and my detail task or whatever. And as I said, the third time I might, when all of the comprehension tasks are over, I might then throw on the subtitles and let them watch it just to fill in any gaps that they didn't hear. But yeah, I know from experience that the second subtitles pop up, everything else shuts down and they just read the words rather than listen to the words. Now, I guess there could be some exceptions, Kabira, like if I give them a gist question, like a pretty easy gist question, like what's the topic of this talk? Or is the writer in the talk talking about something positive or negative? And like if they listen and they have no idea, and if they listen again and they still have no idea, then I might throw on the subtitles, okay? Because if they're genuinely not understanding anything, they're not going to understand anything no matter how many times I play it. So in that case, I might step in, put on the subtitles, and help them out that way. So yeah, I guess it kind of depends. But as a rule, no, I wouldn't use them the first time or possibly even the second time. All right, so Graham, thank you. I'll have to pick carefully. It's for assignment C. Oh yeah, so assignment C on the level 5. Yeah. So when it comes to authentic texts, I really like TED Talks, like Saju mentioned earlier. I use them a lot in the classroom, okay, because they're generally very interesting. They're generally really engaging. The speakers are very clear, maybe a bit fast, but generally very clear. And the topics are always, of pretty much general interest. When it comes to reading texts, what I really like to do is go to news websites like BBC or CBC or NBC or whatever. Okay, go to a news website, and the way they always have the categories up the top, like they have news, culture, travel, maybe lifestyle, maybe economy, maybe environment. They're the sections I really like. That's where you tend to find the good stuff. Like if you go to the travel section of the BBC website, for example, you will find so much interesting stuff there. Or, whatever the Australian version of the BBC is, or whatever the American version of the BBC is, check out the little subheadings, the travel, the culture, the food. Yeah, that's where you find some really interesting texts. The lifestyle sections of these websites. Okay, I always find interesting stuff in there. And this reminds me, Graham, so thank you for setting this off in my mind. Even if you're teaching kids, there is still a lot of really, really interesting authentic material for children. So, don't think that you can't use it for kids, because you absolutely can. For example, do you all know the National Geographic channel and magazine? They have a really, really good website for kids. It's called natgeokids.com, where they have like tons of really cool articles like for children about nature, about the environment, about travel. Yeah. And again, it's all authentic because, that website is aimed at native speaker kids or highly proficient kids. Okay. There's a really good one on the BBC called BBC News Round, which is kind of like a news site just for kids, like with topics that kids would be interested in. We have earth.org kids, okay, which again, it's full of really fun articles on travel, on the environment, etc. So yeah, if any of you do find yourself teaching young learners, there's still a ton of really nice authentic material that you can use. I know I gave a lot of websites there pretty quickly. Remember, as usual, you can go back and watch this webinar in a couple of days. Okay, usually by Tuesday, it is posted on our YouTube channel. So you can go back and check out all of those websites I rattled off pretty quickly there. All right, so Pearl, thank you for the class. Can I use images from free stock sites? Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And, generally you can use pictures from, news, online news sites, newspapers, magazines, etc., that are already out there for mass consumption. All right. So, Elena, in cases where some weak students do not quite succeed in work with authentic materials, what follow-up activities would you recommend to encourage them to continue their studying? Well, Elena, I would just find out their interests and point them towards resources about those interests. I think that if we want our students to continue interacting with authentic materials outside of the classroom, it's got to be because they are genuinely interested in whatever the topic is. So, for example, one of my students, they were from Brazil, and they were telling me that they really loved all of those true crime podcasts in Portuguese. Okay, they would listen in Portuguese. So that is not my genre at all, but I hopped along to Spotify and I looked up like, okay, what are top of the charts of the true crime podcast world in English? Okay. So, I did some research and I went back to the student and I said, oh, why don't you check out this podcast? Yeah, this one is super popular at the moment. I don't know what it's about, but it is true crime. So why don't you give it a listen and see what you think? All right. And the same, like I mentioned at the beginning, my students who wanted to know more about Irish sports, I just went off, did my research and found stuff for them to interact with. So, whatever your students are into, it's up to you to find out. Okay. And, they'll all have different interests. It won't be like a homogenous group. So just, try to get to know them as best you can, what they like, and then find stuff for them to interact with, point them in the right direction. All right. So thank you, Elena. Okay, hello, Vru. What would you say are the most important things to know about a new culture in order to be culturally sensitive? Ooh, interesting, Vru. Good question. Well, a new culture. Gosh, I would say, Vru, that you will learn about the culture as you're there. Okay, like as you're in that new country, you will learn. So to begin with, just avoid anything controversial. Okay. As we said before, avoid anything that mentions like gender stereotypes, avoid anything about religion, avoid anything about war, conflict, politics. Okay. Keep it safe. And as you live in that place longer, you will, of course, become aware then of probably even more subcategories of things that you should avoid. Sometimes you may make a mistake with the material you choose. Your students will let you know. Yeah, and all you can do is just hold your hands up and apologize and just avoid that in future. But yeah, try to keep your topics pretty safe. Okay, until you have a good grasp on the new culture that you're living in. Every country has their stuff. Okay. But yeah, on the whole, I would say avoid religion, avoid politics, avoid sexism, avoid swearing, avoid drugs and alcohol based stuff. And yeah, common sense. If you see an authentic text and it rings alarm bells in your head, don't use it, because chances are it will also ring alarm bells in your students' heads. All right. And we have a follow-up question. And do you have a resource for what types of gestures may be offensive? I do not, but that would be an amazing resource, depending on the culture. Would it be a good idea to ask your students to inform you in case you unknowingly offend them? Yeah, absolutely. Why not? Yeah, your students will be more than happy to tell you, I'm sure. I would say, though, you can do a lot of research like before you go to a place. Like, say, for example, if you're going to, let's pick a random country. If you're going to Turkey, yeah, before you go, Google everything you can about Turkey. Google Turkish culture. Okay, Google Turkish gestures. Okay, really try to do a lot of research before you go to a place. If you're working in a school, like if you're working in a language school in a new country, ask the teachers that have been there a long time. Okay, they will give you the heads up on exactly what is what and what to avoid. But yeah, asking your students is also a nice idea, Vru. I'm sure if my students that I've had in different countries are anything to go by, they will be delighted to tell you all of the rude stuff that you should avoid. All right, thank you, Vru. Okay, so our time is flying by. We only have 1 minute left. So let me just take a quick look back through and make sure I haven't missed any questions. But yeah, we had some great questions today, so thank you, everybody. Some really, really interesting ones. Okay, I think I've got everything. So Peter, can you repeat your name before you go? It's not on screen. Yeah, sure. I'll also put it in the chat box because it looks very different to how it sounds. So my name is Mairead. Think of the word parade and put an M at the beginning instead of a P, and you've got me. Okay, it's yeah, one of those strange Irish names with lots of vowels. So yeah, that's me, Mairead. All right. So everyone, it looks like I have answered all of the questions and our time is up. So thank you all so much for spending this hour with me. Hopefully you have lots of really good ideas to use authentic materials. I thoroughly recommend authentic materials, even though they can be scary, both for the teacher and the students at first. Push through, okay? It is totally worth it. Try to incorporate them as much as you can. So as always, before I go, I'm going to ask you to please fill in our end of survey, or our end of webinar survey. You know, we are always looking for ways to improve. So if you have any suggestions or any topics you'd like us to cover, please go along to the survey and pop them in. We always review all of your answers very thoroughly. So you can scan the QR code, or you can follow the link that I am typing in the chat box now. Your feedback is always very much appreciated. Okay. And as always, I will remind you that all of our webinars from the past couple of years are on our YouTube channel. So go along to YouTube, type in the TEFL Academy, and you will find videos going back a long time with all of our webinars on tons of different topics. So yeah, please do check that out. All right, everyone, I hope you enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. All right, take care. Bye-bye.